Hello, everybody. Welcome to 50 Years Ago This Month with Steve and Dave. This month, we're talking about February 1971, the Hot 100, Billboard Hot 100 of that month. And we'll be taking a look at the top 10 of that top Hot 100 and a smattering of the top 40 as well.
That's right. That's right.
So we're going to be starting off with some newcomers to the charts.
Absolutely.
The Osmond Brothers. Steve, what's their background story?
Well, yeah, unbelievably. Here we go. Number one, February 13th, 1971 is the Osmond Brothers, One Bad Apple. The Osmond Brothers, that is an actual family from Utah, a very large family. And they were from, when they were little boys, the Osmonds were singers. Their family tried to really kind of mold them into a kind of musical act. Their father in particular, they were a barbershop group with the kind of four-part harmony and all of that. The father was very, very relentless in this regard, had them audition lots of different places. Eventually, they made their way to the attention of Andy Williams, and they spent a number of years in the 1960s, the Osmonds, as a kind of house singing group of the Andy Williams show. After Andy Williams went off the air, then they were on the Jerry Lewis show for a year or so. They were really, I think, a staple in American homes during the 1960s. It's interesting and that as this kind of Osmond singing group, they were very traditional, quite frankly, quite square. And the transition from sort of the Osmonds as barbershop group to the Osmonds as a popular singing group was a pretty big jump and I think quite a shocking one to some people. But they never really shook the image of them being a kind of square group. And even when they're rocking, and some of their songs do kind of rock, Crazy Horses, for example.
Yeah, Crazy Horse, Down by the Lazy River.
That there was this sense that they were trying a little too hard. But the Osmonds were a professional group by the time we get to 1971. And so, Dave, you want to talk a little bit about One Bad Apple, which was their breakout hit?
Sure. One Bad Apple was written by George Henry Jackson for the Jackson Five, although no relation there. But George Henry Jackson wrote it for it, and in fact, the Jacksons were going to record this. Donnie Osmond said that later. Michael Jackson said, we were going to record One Bad Apple, but we went with ABC instead, which wasn't a bad choice, obviously. Became one of their number one hits. But they didn't. And so One Bad Apple was sitting around for the Osmonds when they were rebranding themselves as a pop group. And it's hard to imagine that rebranding didn't have something to do with the huge popularity in 1970 of the Jackson Five, which was a very similar type of group, singing brothers, also with a very domineering father, Joe Jackson, who kind of pushed them in that direction. And the Jackson Five had 4 number one singles just coming right off the starting line.
Absolutely.
And that's had never happened before in Motown history. It's a very rare occurrence anywhere in pop history. So clearly somebody thought, well, we have a group of nice white boys. Maybe we can get a part of that market.
I think, yeah. And I think,
so they took this.
Yes.
Anyway, it was part of their debut album. It it was on the at number one for like 6 weeks. So it was it was the number 4 for the year in 1971. Did extremely well. Of course, it went gold. It also went number 6 for rhythm and blues chart, which is extremely unusual for the
yes,
for bubblegum, essentially bubblegum hit.
There would be no more unlikely group on a rhythm and blues chart than a group of young men from Ogden, Utah. But I mean, there you have it.
But here's the thing: as I said, you had 4 number 1 hits. The Jackson 5 were huge at this point. And if you're driving down the road listening to the radio and One Bad Apple comes on, you're going to think, oh, the Jackson 5 have another hit, because it's a very similar sound. And that's no accident. As I said, the song had been written for them. And that's a misperception that that continues on today. If you Google One Bad Apple, you'll often find One Bad Apple, Jackson 5. I've even seen videos on YouTube for One Bad Apple with the Jackson 5.
Oh, come on.
Of course, they're not performing it, but the One Bad Apple's playing, and they have all stills of all the Jackson brothers up.
Of course. Oh, jeez.
So yeah, it's a fairly common misperception. Anyway, this was recorded just before Halloween, 1970, at Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, with Rick Hollis, the producer. So another Muscle Shoals hit. It was mixed in Memphis by Terry Manning, probably at Stax Records, but maybe at Ardent Studios. He was working in both places at the time. They recorded their first album, The Osmonds. The entire thing is just under half an hour. They finished recording on November 13th. So they were at this for like 3 weeks to record them. And it was released on November 14th. So less than a month between they're starting to record until the time that One Bad Apple hits the air.
It's rocket ship time. Yeah.
It's incredible. Care to guess what the B-side was?
I don't have any idea. What was the B-side? We just looked at the image a second ago. I can't remember. I don't know.
He ain't.
Oh, jeez.
I think a great choice for the Osmonds.
In a way, it's okay. There is a kind of quasi-religious thing. It's always sort of hovering around He Ain't Heavy. And
Right.
the Osmonds were, they were always relatively upfront about their faith. And so, yeah, I guess in a way, it kind of makes sense, but oh my gosh. Oh.
Just one last thing about the parallel between the Jackson 5 and the Jackson 5 had a hit cartoon series on ABC from the cartoon studios Rankin Bass, and that ran for a year between 1970 and 1971. Sorry, from 71 to 72. When that ended, ABC essentially replaced it with the Osmond cartoon show, which had all the Osmond brothers that had played on One Bad Apple, plus the lovable, adorable Jimmy Osmond.
Jimmy Osmond, yes, the youngest of
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jimmy was kind of the motor of the whole thing, all the little adventures and misadventures that they got into. of something that Jimmy had done or said or whatever.
That Jimmy.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think they overlapped for like a month. But one of the differences between the cartoon series is that the Osmonds actually spoke their own cartoon voices, which the Jacksons never did.
Which means that means that they got paid for it. They didn't pay a voice actor to say those lines. The Osmonds were famously frugal in terms of their production. And the Donnie and Marie show, which happens later in the 70s, moved out of California to Utah in order to save money. They were, I'm not suggesting that they sewed their own costumes and stuff like that, but they always kept a very close track of the bottom line. That's actually why they got started. The part of the impetus for the Osmonds being formed was that there's a whole bunch of Osmond children, and the two oldest Osmond boys don't perform. They're actually very, very hearing impaired. And the initial impetus for the performances were to pay for hearing aids, which in the early 60s were incredibly expensive, apparently, and needed constant maintenance and whatnot. And so, so voicing their own lines, I'm sure that there was a number of kind of things at work there, but I wonder if a bottom line wasn't part of it too.
Well, and they got the whole family. Everybody that could sing ended up singing for money, including their younger sister Marie. Although Jimmy was but he was involved before Marie actually started.
That's right.
Musical career.
It's
although
yeah,
go ahead.
No, I just it's of all the Osmonds, obviously Donnie was the breakout star, as was again eventually Marie. The Osmonds, and Jimmy had his moment in the sun, long-haired lover from Liverpool and all of that. They have though been in the American part of the American kind of cultural conversation for, well, certainly 60 years now. And clearly their high watermark was the early 1970s, as you're talking about. But once they entered the American kind of imagination, they've never really left. And so it's
and one more parallel to the Jacksons, I guess, is the fact that it was the charismatic young singer who really drove the popularity of the group.
Exactly.
And Donnie Osmond was 12 years old when they recorded One Bad Apple.
Yeah.
He immediately became, the heartthrob of the group.
Absolutely.
When they released Sweet and Innocent from this album, from their debut, it was actually credited to Donnie Osmond and not to the Osmonds or the Osmond Brothers.
Oh, that's interesting. But
to Donnie Osmond, although it came from the Osmond Brothers album.
Huh.
So, yes. That was one thing. And of course, Donnie was then one part of the television duo, Donnie and Marie.
That's right.
Which also became an extremely popular variety show. Mid-70s?
Yeah, mid to late 70s. Yeah, absolutely. No, it was a big thing for a while, for sure. And Donnie Osmond then, took, his own kind of solo career. Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. He toured with that thing around the country for years. But you're talking about the parallels. There was no way of thinking about the Osmonds without thinking about the Jackson 5 and vice versa in this era. And they were oftentimes just sort of, you'd look at teen magazines, they would be sort of paired next to each other. And Michael Jackson and Donnie Osmond were very much kind of, at least kind of faux rivals on some level. And clearly,
yes, apparently they got along very well, but certainly for the magazines and the heartthrob magazines, there was this rivalry that.
Oh, that's right.
You were a Donnie fan or you were a Michael fan, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. So
maybe one last parallel is that once the group had reached its apex and was kind of on the decline in terms of popularity, the Jacksons went to Las Vegas and became an act there, also at the urging of their father. And the Osmonds became an act in the Las Vegas of the East, Branson, Missouri.
Well, the Ozarks at least. Yes, Branson. Yeah, they had their own theater there for, I think, close to 15, 20 years, something like that. Right. They were.
So they had a huge career as a Branson Stables.
No, absolutely. It's the, yeah, they were, they've been a very durable group. The oldest of the brothers now, I mean, they have health concerns and whatnot, but they've been kicking it for a long time. And but it all really gets started for them in 71 with One Bad Apple, which very much became a kind of signature song. And very much, in many ways was sort of the introduction to the Osmonds for some Americans, for sure. So at number 2 in mid-February of 1971 is Dawn's Knock Three Times, which you've talked about a couple points along the way. At number 3 is the Lynn Anderson worldwide smash, Rose Garden, which is Lynn Anderson had an enormous career on the country charts, an enormous career. A few people in the 70s, she had 18 top 10 country hits.
Wow.
During her career. She only had one pop hit though, and that's Rose Garden. Rose Garden was written by a guy by the name of Joe South, and Joe South was a songwriter of some note in this era. He captured the Grammy. Joe South captured the Grammy 1970 Song of the Year for Games People Play, and he also penned then Rose Garden. But Lynn Anderson's version of it also then kicked off what was called at the time a kind of countrypolitan sound. Country music had long been defined by fiddles, twangy guitars, and kind of hokey vocals. I mean, it was very kind of distinctive vocal sound. But the sound of Rose Garden was much lusher, orchestration. Lynn Anderson didn't seem to be sort of pandering to anyone. She was really just belting it out. And this song really caught fire. Again, it was a global smash. And it really, I think, breathed some life into country music. And you began to see many more kind of crossover songs after Rose Garden. Lynn Anderson herself was kind of a figure. She was, quite attractive. She had a kind of very strong stage presence. She seemed she almost had sort of pop sensibilities on the stage, and so she became a very popular figure during the early to mid 70s, and you'd see her on all sorts of shows and whatnot. But in terms of her pop appeal, this is sort of it for her. Rose Garden was really the only song that she ever made any waves with on the pop charts. But Rose Garden is sort of, it is in many ways a kind of a landmark song in country music because it opened country music up to a much broader audience. So we have Lynn Anderson, Rose Garden at number 3. At number 4 is a song that you still hear on occasion. You hear it on oldies, radio and oldies, stations, that kind of thing. And it's from Dave Edmunds, and it's a song called "I Hear You Knocking." Number 4.
I Hear You Knocking was written by Dave Bartholomew, and Bartholomew was kind of had made a name for himself in New Orleans rhythm and blues, and penned over 40 hits with Fats Domino together in the mid 50s, and produced some of Domino's better known hits like "Ain't It a Shame," "I'm Walking," and so on. He also wrote "My Ding-a-ling," which Chuck popularized. Kind of a song, but a big hit for Barry. And
for sure,
as Barry was wont to do, he originally took the writing credit for that song, but in fact it was Bartholomew.
That's 100%. Yeah, that's 100% Chuck Berry in a bag full of cash. Yeah, but
Uh, so
But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I Hear You Knocking was a hit twice in 1955 by two different artists. The first to record it was Smiley Lewis, and it made it up to number 2 in the R&B charts in 1955. Was Lewis, but a kind of more tame or saccharine version was also recorded by Gail Storm, an actress.
Oh, jeez.
And she cleaned up with it. She reached number 2 on the Hot 100 charts with it, which led Bartholomew to just think of Smiley Lewis as kind of a bad luck singer. Smiley Lewis never sold more than 100,000 copies of any song for Imperial Records, which is who Bartholomew was working for. So. Yeah, he thought, well, Gail Storm kind of killed his chances for a crossover to the mainstream with I Hear You Knocking. Anyway, back to 1970. Dave Edmunds, looking for a song for his first album, is wanting to do "Let's Work Together," which it was a hit for.
Well, I know it was remade. I know who remade it into a hit, but I don't know who did the original. Brian Ferry had a hit for it in the 70s, but
a slightly different version. A slightly different version of "Let's Work Together, Let's Stick Together."
Yeah, he changed. Yeah, that's right.
Changed the lyrics a little bit, made it about a relationship.
No, you're right. That's right.
Canned Heat. Canned Heat.
Heat.
And that was already a cover. But because they had recently done it, he thought, okay, well, I can't do it. He was listening to the radio in his car, and he heard the old Smiley Lewis version of I Hear You Knocking, and thought, well, it's basically the same arrangement. You have this modified 12-bar thing, and so I might as well go with that, which is what he did. Went to the studio, recorded, played all the instruments himself. In the original rhythm and blues version was very piano heavy, of course, and Edmunds had a more guitar friendly version of it, but it was straight out rock and roll, just kind of driving rock and roll thing.
Yeah. With the kind of old timey feel, though, there is that song, Edmunds' song. There's a kind of it's a kind of retro. It feels a little retro-ish. It sounds a little, and I don't know much about the recording techniques and whatnot, but there is something about it that it sounds like a song that comes from the 50s. That you're right. It has a driving, pulsing beat, propulsive, but it has a kind of retro feel.
And one of that is kind of this. The vocals a little bit tinny, and that comes from it being recorded over a telephone line.
Okay, all right, good.
He sang it into a telephone, and that's how they recorded the voice. Everything else, he was playing piano, guitar, everything else. He had a slide guitar solo, of course. There's heavy compression on the whole bit, minimalist piano, which was essentially an augmented C7 chord that was played only twice. And during the instrumental break, he just rattles off this list of names: Fats Domino, Smiley Lewis, Chuck Berry, really talking about the pioneers of that sort of.
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely
boogie woogie rhythm blues sort of thing. So John Lennon heard it, and he said, I love simple rock and roll.
Oh, he loved that. None of that stuff.
Get back to the basics, and he really loved the song, so he
absolutely
had to call out. So it reached number 4, so it peaked at number 4 here on the Hot 100. Although it did make to number 1 on the UK singles chart, where it was in December 1970 already. It was the number 1 Christmas hit.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
And so he got a solid gold record out of it. And the whole thing then got put on his debut album, Rockpile, in 1972. So I hear you knocking.
That's interesting. The phone thing is fascinating. I've always wondered about that. Do you have any sense of why they recorded it that way? What was the impulse for that? It's a very distinctive vocal.
Yeah. I think if you were trying to duplicate somehow the recording sound of earlier records, like early jazz singing or something like that, that would be a good way to do it. But it wasn't really a 1950s thing. By that time, they had decent vocal recording equipment. You're right.
To that point, it sounds like something recorded in the 20s with Rudy Valley, where you're singing through a
that sort of thing.
It's a very the song is very distinctive. It just when you hear it, it's like, oh yeah, that's right. And it's always sounded. It's
a lot of fun, and of course, it's the trope of you're left by your lover comes back, and you don't want to have anything more to do with it. Kind of a I will survive trope.
No, that's right.
Now you're back, but I don't want to know anything more about you.
And Dave Edmunds then, really for the rest of the 70s, then he's very much influenced by these early rockers. He partnered with, among others, Nick Lowe in a group that they called Rockpile for a while. But yeah, and I think this is really his only. This is really only Dave Edmunds' only real American hit. That's right, because he doesn't do anything else, right? Of note.
Not that I can think of.
I don't think so. Yeah. Okay. So at number 4, we have Dave Edmunds and I Hear You Knocking. At number 5 in mid-February, we have the Bee Gees in Lonely Days, which we talked about the brothers Gibb before. At number 6 is George Harrison's smash My Sweet Lord, and the double A side then Isn't It a Pity. Number 7 is King Floyd from New Orleans and his really lone hit on the pop charts, something called Groove Me. And then at number 8, well, technically speaking, I guess it's not his first sort of venture into the pop charts in the United States. It really becomes his first big hit in the US. And it's Elton John's Your Song. So
Elton John had already started making some headway into the U.S., had already found something of an audience in LA when his record company sent him across essentially to invade America, to find the American audience.
Right.
He had played at the Troubadour to some very successful live sessions there.
Oh, very successful.
In fact, that led to Three Dog Night recording Your Song on their third album, I think. But they did not release it as a single because they wanted to give him a chance to get a hit with his own song, which is a sort of ethical decision that is not necessarily typical of the music business.
I confess I find that impossible to believe that actually went down the way you describe it. I mean, that kind of ethical.
But there
never happens.
Yeah, there was a friendship there though. So maybe. Yeah. And actually, after after they had written it, the Hollies expressed an interest.
Oh, is that right?
Because Bernie Taupin and Elton John had been writing songs for quite a while.
That's absolutely true.
Publishing company, and Elton John had even played on a few Hollies songs, done some studio work with them.
Yeah, okay.
So with him, they heard the song, they liked it, and were basically told by the record company, listen, we're going to give him a chance with it. He's already recorded it, and he's already gone to America to try to sell the thing. So, but when he bombs, you can have it.
Yeah. Well, right. It's the record companies famously had no faith in Elton John as a performer at all. I mean, it's a guy that could actually sell albums, right? That they just didn't believe. They just really didn't believe in him. He just didn't have the it factor.
Well, if you looked at Reginald Dwight, you did not see someone with star quality, right?
Apparently so.
He had big glasses. So, but they did have enough faith in his songwriting and in his singing that gave him a shot at it. But he was an unknown. So, what's going to happen? Is he going to take off like a rocket with this song? Probably not. Well,
yeah, probably not. Yeah. Well,
but he did. So, this was his big introduction to America and then the rest of the world, of course. John Lennon heard your song and said, that's the first time he had heard anything new since the Beatles started experimenting around. It was a really new sound for pop records, and he said it was about time, and he was really pleased to hear it. And apparently that was the basis for a long ongoing relationship between John Lennon and Taupin and Elton John.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's at an Elton John concert that John Lennon makes his last live appearance. I think it's in the mid 70s, right?
That's right. Is that Madison Gardens?
I think that's right. Madison Square Garden. I think that's right.
Madison Square Garden. So, yes, Empty Garden that John wrote later was about Lennon's assassination. So
great song.
It is a great song. This song was written in the kitchen of Elton John's mother after breakfast. Bernie Taupin was just sitting around and just had some ideas. So he started writing. And he said, took him about 20 minutes trying it all out. And then he gave it to Elton, and he read it, looked at it, and said, "Oh, this is fantastic lyrics. I can't fuck this up." So he sat down on the piano, and again, about 20 minutes later, he had the music worked out. So this perennial hit, this evergreen of pop music, was written in about 3/4 of an hour in London.
But it follows the pattern, right? And so the pattern between Taupin and John for decades has been that Taupin pens the lyrics, hands them to John, and then there you go. And then Elton John, the magic starts with and that's how they've worked for.
And it is a magic. Yeah, they just have produced hit after hit over decades, and have done it differently. They don't work together in the sense of collaborating or anything like that.
They don't. No.
They each do their own thing and bring it together. So there's no arguing with success.
No, absolutely not. No, but it's a very unusual. Part of the unusual nature of it is just the longevity that these guys have worked together for decades. And have had, and then of course the success they've had, but it's just really strange. What is it?
And they have a very, very close relationship. Although they say, we don't hang out. It's not that kind of but we have a very deep understanding and
Right.
appreciation for each other.
Certainly. Yep.
That's never really faded.
No, it never. Apparently not. Yeah. What is it about this?
So,
Yeah. What is? I mean, but your song. I mean, it becomes sort of so identified with both Taupin and John, and it really becomes Elton John's.
I don't know if you remember this. Kind of like You're So Fame. The idea was, who are they talking about? Who is? It's your song. You can tell anybody that it's your song.
Yeah.
Who is you here? And there was really kind of a guessing game going on about.
Right.
And there never was anybody in particular. Bernie Taupin was 17 years old when he wrote that. Was not in a relationship. Really didn't have any experience with romance or with a romantic relationship, and just was kind of imagining what it would be like and how he would feel and what he would say.
Yeah.
It's a virginal song. It's naive and innocent, but he said maybe it's authentic because that's where I was at that time. It was just
incredible. It's so evocative. I think as much as any Elton John song, the lyrics here are just so, they're so evocative, and there's something about them that are just, clearly poetic. Again, this is one of those songs that will live on for a long time. It's part of the canon. It's a 20th century kind of classic. But there is something about it that is so intimate and so personal that just makes the song, it just drills it into your heart. I mean, you hear it and you just can't forget it.
Yeah, and it's clearly one of their really great hits. It was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1998. Right. The Rolling Stone placed it at 137 of their 500 greatest songs of all time. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame considers it one of 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. And Elton John plays this at virtually every concert that he gives. I just think he thinks he owes it to his fans. I mean, it's expected.
It has to be a signature song, doesn't it? I mean, he's had so many.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has to be the song.
Yeah, and it's been covered by everybody and their brother. But it went double platinum. But it was originally on his second studio album that was named after him, Elton John, just simply Elton John. And it hit number 7 on the UK singles chart. But although it only made number 8 on the Hot 100, again, it's arguably one of his most popular songs.
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, it's really, it's then the sort of the entry into his most fertile period, he and Taupin's most fertile period. This 1971 to sort of 1975, 1976 is just one important album and many, many singles after the other. It's just, and changing styles and whatnot along the way. But this is, I mean, your song is just sort of the entry into sort of the decade, or at least the half decade of Elton John. He kind of rules the world in a way.
Yeah, it was the rocket blasts that sent him into orbit.
Yes.
Talk about rock. Right. He had several years before he had his first breakdown, and those were very, very fertile years. Oh, by the way, Andy Williams earlier, Elton John played your song on the Andy Williams show.
That's right. That's one of his. That might be his first appearance on American television.
That's exactly right. It was his first American television, first television appearance. But
the Andy Williams thing. Andy Williams' new talent, and there are a lot of Andy Williams has a lot of intersection with a lot of people. You wouldn't think, we think popular music. Do you think Andy Williams? Probably not. But yeah, he introduced lots of talent to the United States, and that's Elton John, on the Andy Williams show. Okay, so Thanks. That is your song at number 8, Elton John's classic, with the amazing lyrics from Bernie Taupin. At number 9 is a tune from Gladys Knight and the Pips. That's right, the one and only Gladys Knight, If I Were Your Woman. And Gladys Knight and the Pips are an Atlanta-based group that were on the Motown label for a long time. Eventually, they moved over to the Buddha label, but they were really a staple of Motown through the 60s and the early 70s. And Gladys Knight, who still performs, was actually discovered as a kid, discovered, I guess in air quotes, on the Ted Mack Amateur Hour in 1952, I think as she was an 8-year-old. I mean, her vocal talents were apparent even as a young person. The Pips was kind of a revolving cast of backup singers, but eventually then William Guest, Bubba Knight, her brother, and Edward Patton became sort of the solidifying Pips. And the Pips performed alongside Gladys Knight from the early 60s until the late 1980s. It's easy enough to sort of like, oh yeah, Gladys Knight, you know, their biggest song, of course, was the Midnight Train to Georgia, which was their sole #1 pop hit. But Gladys Knight and the Pips put 16 songs in the top 20 on the pop charts.
They were the first ones to chart with I Heard It Through the Grapevine.
Yeah, I think that's right. No, that's absolutely right. They were, you know, there was something about the Gladys Knight and the Pips that really appealed to lots of people. They were obviously very, very popular on the soul charts as well. And they were a kind of staple on American television. Again, this is the era where there would be variety shows, and and every variety show would have at least one musical guest. And Gladys Knight and the Pips were on all the time, so their songs were enormously popular. I don't know that they ever had the kind of popularity or power or influence of other Black acts at this time, but they were definitely a kind of chart force. I mean, just hard to argue with that kind of success. Hard to argue against it. And If I Were Your Woman,
yeah, they were kind of a Motown staple.
Yeah.
What Motown act did Gladys Knight discover?
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
She actually was credited with discovering, well, I don't know that she was credited with it. Actually, Diana Ross was credited with it, but she was the one that discovered the Jackson 5 for Motown.
Oh, is that right? Well, that's quite a discovery. And that's quite a segue then into the next song. In mid-February 1971, number 10 song is Mama's Pearl by the Jackson 5. Dave, you've already alluded to the fact that the Jackson 5 in 1970, they were a hit machine, you know, one hit after the next hit after the next hit. They really ruled the charts with these consecutive songs just right out of the gate. It's, I guess, one of the things that makes Mama's Pearl worth noting from a kind of chart perspective is that it is the first, well, it didn't hit #1. It peaked at #2. And it marks in a way sort of the downhill slide, although it's a fairly gradual downhill slide, but the downhill slide of the Jackson 5. The Jackson 5 as a group would never again hit #1. Obviously Michael Jackson did, but the Jackson 5 would never as a group hit #1. And it was, you know, it was a part of this incredible kind of juggernaut, you know, coming out of the gate. And as you've already alluded to earlier, the whole thing with the Osmonds, the Jackson 5 and the Osmonds were just sort of right next to each other on the charts. You hear it on the radio, on the cover of magazines. You know, they were kind of everywhere. But I guess Mama's Pearl is, I mean, the bloom is off the rose slightly because it doesn't reach #1. I mean, for no other reason than.
Did Michael do the lead vocals on that?
I believe he did. No, I believe he did.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Because there were some Jackson 5 songs where like Jermaine or one of the would take over the lead singing.
Yeah, you're right.
role.
But I'm pretty sure that Michael Jackson was on the lead here.
Okay.
It's so there you have it. Number 10, you have Mama's Pearl from the Jackson 5. We're going to cherry pick then from other songs that are on the charts in this time. And at number 11 is a Canadian singer-songwriter, guy by the name of Gordon Lightfoot. And if I could read
Right. And this was his first his first introduction to the American audience, essentially. And it peaked at number 5 on the Hot 100.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, it peaked at number 9, so it got into the top 10. And the writer was Gordon Lightfoot himself, of course. This was from his "Sit Down, Young Stranger" album. At least that's what it was called until "If You Could Read My Mind" became such a hit that they renamed the album "If You Could Read My Mind."
Right. Quickly.
Yes. This became a number 1 hit on the Canadian singles chart. And the lyrics were inspired by his divorce. He was sitting in a vacant house in Toronto one summer and came up with these lyrics. When he sings it now, he changes one word of one line as a favor to his daughter Ingrid, where he sings, "I'm just trying to understand the feelings that you lack." He said, "Well, wasn't it feelings that you both lacked?" So he now the feelings that we lack. Anyway, that's pretty much it. A beginning of an impressive recording career, and there's a handful of Gordon Lightfoot songs that I just consider to be absolute canon.
Well, me too. I think that, he's really, I think, quite a remarkable talent, and that late 60s, early 70s period for him is very fertile. He was part of the Greenwich Village scene in the early 1960s, became friendly with this up-and-comer named Bob Dylan. And so he and Dylan were pretty close there for a while. Actually, Bob Dylan is the person who inducted Gordon Lightfoot into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame. Gordon Lightfoot was also aware of a young Canadian folk singer, Joni Mitchell, and played somewhat of a role in helping getting her more established on the folk scene.
It seems like there was some connection with Anne Murray as well.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think if you're a Canadian pop singer, you probably at some point know all the others. I think that's a small community.
I think that's right.
So
I think that's absolutely right. And so we have Gordon Lightfoot at number 11. At number 12, I just wanted to mention briefly a American singer named Bobby Goldsboro. And this is a song, "Watching Scotty Grow." Bobby Goldsboro was a singer who had a few hits during the late 60s and early 1970s. He hit number 1 in 1968, for example, with a song called "Honey." "Watching Scotty Grow" is, again, a song about, as you might imagine, watching a little boy grow up. And I just wanted to mention that it was written by Mac Davis. And Mac Davis was a performer, singer, songwriter of great note. Mac Davis, who passed away last year. Mac Davis, who was a great friend of, among others, Elvis Presley. Mac Davis, in no particular order, wrote, in addition to "Watching Scotty Grow," "In the Ghetto," "Memories," "A Little Less Conversation," "Baby Don't Get Hooked on Me," "One Hell of a Woman," "Stop and Smell the Roses," "It's Hard to Be Humble," "I Believe in Music," and on and on and on it goes. And so I just wanted to mention, because
and sang a handful of those himself. But
absolutely.
For the most part, it was other people. Yeah.
No, that's right. Bobby Goldsboro, again, was one of these people who would pop up a great deal on American television at the time. He had a syndicated show in the early 1970s for, I think, 3 years. Bobby Goldsboro is still alive and still performs, but, just if you were going to be in the pop scene, in the pop world in the early 1970s, you probably needed to demonstrate a little bit of versatility, be able to sort of take maybe do a little bit of, acting in terms of a skit, to be able to tell a joke. And if you could do that, then you could make your way onto variety shows, which then greatly it would greatly enhance your career and your earnings potential, and certainly Bobby Goldsboro fit into that. A couple of songs we want to get to. One is a song written by a guy by the name of Jerry Jeff Walker, and performed by a group called the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. And it's a song that is at, I think it's at number 14 right now, but it's something in mid-February. It's a song called Mr. Bojangles. Dave, you want to talk a little bit about Bojangles?
Yeah, Mr. Bojangles peaked at number 9 on the Hot 100 chart. It was from the Uncle Charlie and His Dog Teddy album. But before I talk about the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, I'd like to talk a little bit about the writing of the song.
Yes.
Jerry Jeff Walker, it's nearly a transcription of something that he had actually gone through, and he was in a drunk tank in New Orleans, and there was this old homeless guy, a street performer who had also been taken in for public drunkenness, public intoxication, and they were sitting there talking, and this guy started telling a story about his dog, and it just kind of brought everybody down. And somebody just asked, well, can we do anything to lighten the mood? So this guy got up and did a little tap routine.
Yeah.
And called himself Mr. Bojangles. So it was just really, he just wrote about that particular incident. And that's what that song is a more or less literal telling of that tale. Now, interestingly, Mr. Bojangles had this handle because he didn't want the police to know
right.
who he was, to be able to identify him in any meaningful way. But he got the name Bojangles from Bill Robinson,
right.
Bill Bo Bobson, who was the best known, most popular, most well-paid black entertainer in the first half of the 20th century. And he was involved in all sorts of things. He was started off in minstrel shows and eventually on to doing Broadway and Hollywood movies. He was involved in the first interracial dance with Shirley Temple.
Yes.
So
quite scandalous. Yes.
Yes.
Back in the day.
But he was an incredibly influential figure in the entertainment industry, and actually opened some doors for other entertainers. But that's just that background. That's where Bojangles comes from, and he had his own special style of dancing. He had this stair thing where he would tap up and down a staircase, which he even tried to patent unsuccessfully. But anyway, so that's where the Bojangles comes from. Now, I'd like to read an interview that Jeff Hanna gave, the guitarist of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, about how they came to record the song, because it's quite entertaining, actually. So this is a quote from him. "We were rehearsing for Uncle Charlie and his dog Teddy in a giant jukebox warehouse in Long Beach, California, where bassist Les Thompson's dad was a distributor. Driving home one night, I heard the tail end of this song on the radio. There was no back announcing on FM, so we had no idea who or what it was. I pulled the car over to listen, and my eyes just welled up. The song really moved me. The next day, I announced I'd heard this beautiful tune we ought to record. Guitarist Jimmy Ibbotson jumped up and blurted, "Hey, I think I know what song you're talking about." He ran to the parking lot, popped the trunk of his Dodge Dart, and under the spare tire, I'm not even sure it was in a sleeve, was the 45 of Mr. Bojangles. When he left Newcastle, Indiana for California, he was given the single by this hippie, whom he described as a witch, telling him mysteriously, "You should have this."
Oh my God.
We excitedly ran into the jukebox factory, found a playable turntable, put some pennies on the disc. There was no amplification, so we had to listen to these tinny speakers and pulled the lyrics as best we could. We actually screwed up on a couple of the words in the final record. We recorded at World Pacific Studios on West 3rd Street in Los Angeles, where a lot of amazing jazz and R&B records were made. I sang lead on Mr. Bojangles with Jimmy doing harmonies. Mm-hmm. We actually switched on the last verse where I went up to the high harmony. We wanted to use accordion and mandolin together because the emotional impact was so beautiful. We were big fans of the band's Rockin' Chair, on which Robbie Robinson played this tremolo archtop. I remember performing the songs live before the album release and seeing some of the waitresses get all moony. And I thought, wow, this must be good. We'd already released one single, Some of Shelley's Blues, which we used to sing with Linda Ronstadt, but it peaked at number 64, so we were pretty disappointed. Then one day, we got a call from Liberty Records that an FM studio in Shreveport, Louisiana, was wearing out Mr. Bojangles, and the phones were just lighting up.
Yep.
This was all for a 5-minute waltz about an old guy and his dog. But people just loved and responded to the song. It was an emotional high point of our set. My personal favorite is Jerry Jeff Walker's original. He always liked Nina Simone's cover.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And after it became a hit, Sammy Davis Jr. would give us a shout out when he performed it.
Yes.
End quote.
That's super cool. No, that's super cool. That it's an amazing song. It's an amazing song, and I actually think that the Dirt Band's performance is actually really very, very wonderful. And it's just one of those.
It's my personal favorite. Yeah.
No, Dirt. Yeah, they're incredible. And I think it became. I mean, the Dirt Band, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, is still around in some form or function, and I think it's the one song that's really very much attached to them. But it's obviously the song that made Jerry Jeff Walker, a boatload of money, and he sort of made his career as a. Jerry Jeff Walker was very much involved in the outlaw country movement in the late 60s, early 70s, palled around with Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and others, and just passed away this past fall. But it's just, again, one of those songs that is, kind of Americana. You hear it and it harkens back to an earlier era, and again, so evocative. And you talk about the drunk tank and all that. You're there. You're right there.
Yeah.
It's happening.
Yeah.
No, it's really stunning. So so there we go. So we have the Mr. Bojangles with the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. The last song we wanted to talk about today is a kind of cultural phenomenon in the early 1970s. It's easy enough to sort of lose sight of this in the the decades removed from early 1970s. But if it's like the early 70s, everybody knows about Love Story. That Love Story is this phenomenon. It's a novel, right? It's a novel written by Eric Siegel. It becomes then this best hit film starring the luminous Ally McGraw and Ryan O'Neal. And then it's recorded over and over again. The recording that we want to mention here briefly is the theme to Love Story from Henry Mancini and his orchestra, which in mid-February was at number 13. Excuse me, it's at 21. It would peak at number 13. A quick word about Henry Mancini, who became, I think, in many ways, sort of Mr. Hollywood, Mr. Movie Score, Mr. Television Score in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. He became ubiquitous as a kind of orchestra leader. I mean, growing up, I just thought Henry Mancini was like orchestral music in a way.
Yeah. Peter Gunn theme, Pink Panther. Um, the baby elephant walk. What didn't he do?
He says that he's involved in everything. I mean, he died a comparatively young man at 70, but he scored, well, he recorded over 90 albums, and he scored dozens and dozens of movies and television shows. He's just, just an incredible figure in music. And Mancini is, I mean, synonymous with film scores and television scores. I wanted just to quickly talk briefly. I have a couple stories about Love Story and Eric Siegel. One is that Eric Siegel, again, the author of Love Story, was also a runner. This is the early 70s, when running was still pretty exotic. I mean, as a kind of physical fitness regimen, very few people were long distance runners, and Eric Siegel was an amateur marathon runner. And so it's approaching the 1972 Munich Olympics, and ABC, who had the Olympics at the time, the coverage, hired Eric Siegel as a commentator. The reason I know about this is that I grew up in Kansas, and one of the leading distance runners for the United States was a guy by the name of Frank Shorter. Frank Shorter was a marathoner. Frank Shorter was, his wife at the time was a Kansan. She lived in a place called Hutchinson, Kansas, which is where I lived pretty close to. And so approaching the Olympics, then there were lots of features in, when I grew up in Kansas, in papers and on television and whatnot about Frank Shorter and his Kansas connections and all that. And so everybody knew Frank Shorter. So the Olympics, the Munich Olympics, which are obviously a very tragic set of games and all of that, but when the marathon rolls around, the feature of any marathon in the Olympics is the final lap around. So they're running through the streets of the city, of course, 26 miles and change, and the final lap is in the stadium, and the crowd goes wild and stuff. Well, when the last lap of the Olympics, Frank Shorter's in the lead, except when he gets into the stadium and there's this runner in front of him. And then Imposter had jumped in a few blocks ahead of Shorter, just at the tail end of the race, and had jumped in. And Eric Siegel, who was the commentator of ABC, recognized the imposter. And he is screaming at the top of his lungs, Frank, you're winning. Frank, he's an imposter. Somebody pull that guy off the track. Now we'll put Siegel's commentary in the playlist. It's in the all-time, either as the best sports commentary category or the worst sports commentary category. I remember it vividly as a kid because, of course, you're watching because it's this guy, has a connection to Kansas. There's Frank Shorter, he's behind him. Eric Siegel's going just ape shit, just going crazy in the booth, screaming at the top of his lungs like Frank Shorter could hear him. One other thing about Love Story. Okay, so Love Story, again, love means you never having to say you're sorry. And
right.
So this is an enormous hit. So if Love Story, oh God. So if Love Story, the book, the novel is published and is published on this February 14th, 1970, of course, right? Valentine's Day. The movie premieres in mid-December of 1970. So in less than a calendar year, a screenplay, a film, editing, all of that was put together. Okay, so the film debuts, and it's box office gold. It's a huge hit. Ryan O'Neal, just a word about Ryan O'Neal. Ryan O'Neal, 1970, 1971, Love Story. 1972, What's Up, Doc, alongside Barbra Streisand.
Yeah.
1973, Paper Moon. 1975,
with his daughter, Tatum.
With his daughter, Tatum O'Neal, and then Barry Lyndon Kubrick, who works for Stanley Kubrick. That's 4 years that I would put against anyone, anywhere in Hollywood, where in terms of box office, bonanza, award-winning, classic films, and just, it just really quite, and maybe it helps us explain then why Ryan O'Neal had such a roller coaster after that he got to the top of the mountain in a relatively big hurry. I mean, how could you possibly, those few years are just beyond imagination. I mean, it's just incredible. So, but I think it's safe to say, Dave, that
Love Story basically launched his career, right? Because he was unknown before that.
Did. No, that's exactly right. It basically launched his career. And it also made Ali MacGraw even more of a household name. This is really sort of, I think, the high watermark for Ali MacGraw. She had been a model. She was then romantically linked with Steve McQueen and appeared in at least one or two of his films. And was
Well, they were married, right? They were actually.
They were. I think you're right. I think that's right. Nellie McGraw was an actress of sorts. I think she had sort of limited range, but she was, she was this incredible beauty. And this film, oh my God, this film was just, it's so cloying and stuff. But
I hated it.
Yeah, can't either. Love Story was everywhere though. I mean, it's a cultural phenomenon. And so if it's not Henry Mancini with the theme to it, then it's Andy Williams singing the lyrics and all this kind of stuff. And so Love Story was everywhere in 1971.
It's just this trope about a loved one dying of cancer. Why on earth ever make a about that? It's always a downer. Brian's song, I don't know if that was cancer or
I think it was cancer. Yeah, it was cancer.
Was it cancer? Terms of endearment, all of it, it's not necessary. Use these talents in a different way. We do not need to see another movie with this trope ever.
I hear you completely. But again, we should remember, love means never having to say you're sorry. The last thing that I wanted to just to look at is then TV Guide from mid-February 1971. And Dave, I just want you to look at the cover and then just if you could just react to it, because just give us a few words about who's on the cover of TV Guide.
Oh, the delightful Goldie Hawn.
Absolutely, and her own special. Yeah. So,
well, kind of got her start on Rowan and Martin's Laughing.
For sure.
And just a delightful, bubbly person. Had her film debut with Walter Matthau and Ingrid Bergman.
Ingrid Bergman. That's right.
Yeah, in Desert Flower or
Cactus Flower.
Cactus Flower. That's it.
Yeah,
Cactus
that's
Flower.
right.
Just delightful, and has been Kurt Russell's partner for a number of years, and just seems really delightful. She just lights up a screen, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely, and it had a very substantive acting career, I think, to the surprise of some. But she just really demonstrated quite a bit of range. But there you have it. She had her own TV special in mid-February 1971. So that's it. So that's it for 50 years ago. So Dave, you got a couple of thoughts here as we wrap things up.
Sure. As always, we put together a playlist of the songs that we talked about, the songs in the top 10 and the other songs that we've mentioned. You can find that here. You can also find other episodes of 50 Years Ago This Month right here. And if you would care to subscribe, which I highly recommend, you can do that just right there.
Absolutely. So thanks, everybody. And we'll see you soon. Thanks again.
See you next month.